Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. I've said this on this platform many, many times. The evidence of the failed state, some of them are obvious. One of the most obvious one is the very fact that our GDP per capita has dropped. In 1980, when we gained our independence, our GDP per capita was about 6,000 US dollars per capita. And now it's about a third of that, 2,000. You compare yourself with your neighbors, and you can see that they are doing a lot better than yourself. And it's one of the measures you can see. There's no denying it. You can do a similar thing on good governance, democratic index, as we called it. And again, it shows that Zimbabwe, our democratic index is very poor, to say the least. So the failed state, some of the things are obvious. Many people can see that for themselves. But you've got to ask a deeper question. How many people out there really understand why we are a failed state? And I think that question has not been answered truthfully. And I think that is the question that should be asked, particularly in the case of Zimbabwe, where we did not become a failed state overnight. This has been long in coming. The last 45 years since our independence, we have been going down this route relentlessly. Some occasions accelerating to our doom. In the period 2000 to 2008, the Zimbabwe economy collapsed by a record 50%. That is where we are. So the question again is, how many people out there really understand why we are a failed state? Welcome to the program, Benjamin. What's your view on that issue?
Good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. I think I will start by explaining it, for the layman, for those that may not understand the whole GDP per capita concept. A failed state, for example, is when you go to a hospital and you cannot find a service, you cannot find medication, you cannot find accessories and things like bandages, medicines. A failed state is where your children are having to learn under schools, under trees. That's a prime example of a failed state. Where unemployment, people cannot find jobs after completing their education, where you find a country has over 3 million people in the neighboring country, that is an example of a failed state. And I think, I can't put it any clearer than that. And then to answer the question is, how many people do understand? I think people do know that things are not okay in Zimbabwe. This is why you find people are moving out. This is why you find people are now engaging in, you know, their own little businesses as a means of survival, because they have seen that, with the current government, there is nothing that is going to come, or nothing to show that, there is any evidence of improving. So I think the understanding that Zimbabwe is a failed state, it's really not, you know a big task to understand. Of course, then you have the guys that are benefiting from it, you know the likes of Sapatina. For him, he is in a space where he is content, because he has been told that this is as good as it gets. And he is one person that you could say is a lazy thinker. He has got no ability to think for himself, and probably is never been exposed, you know, to what is happening outside the walls of Zimbabwe, or the boundaries of Zimbabwe. So he knows no better. Of course, you will find individuals like that, and usually they are associated with ZANU PF, because the propaganda has been hammered into their heads that, you know this is as good as it gets. And the problem is not with ZANU PF. The problem could be sanctions. The problem could be Westerners. Blame everybody else but yourself. And once you are exposed to that, it becomes very, very difficult to help such kind of individuals. But the big question is, do we know what we need? I think this one here will probably cover everybody, both the layman, both the educated, and so forth. I don't really think we know how to get ourselves out of this mess. Because if we honestly did know, we could have been seeing progress in the direction of actually, you know, fighting for our freedoms, our rights, and better living conditions, and demanding more from government. But this is not the case. We are kind of just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I really don't think the understanding of how to fix the mess, we really don't get it.
One can come to the same conclusion another route. One has got only to look at, we have been going down this path for the last 45 years. So it's not something that happened quickly and we're not aware of it. So we have seen it coming, but did not know what to do. And I think this is one example where many people think they know why we are a failed state. And hence the reason why the country has been blundering from pillar to post and not coming up with a solution. If the truth be said, many Zimbabweans out there have no clue why we are a failed state. And yet, if you ask them, they'll offer you solutions of something that they don't know. And so we've been trying to fix a problem that we did not understand, or we did not fully comprehend. And this is the reason why, in my view, we are blundering from pillar to post. Solutions that we have offered the last 45 years have failed to address the problem. The medicine we have been taking has failed to cure us of our problem. I believe that probably the starting point has to be for people to understand that those who think they know, they're actually dangerous, because they actually don't know, and therefore they are forcing the nation to accept solutions that are not working. Knowledge is an important thing. But sometimes when you think you know, when you don't, that can become very counterproductive. Indeed, can even become dangerous. And I think as a nation, we've got to accept that reality, that we have been applying solutions to the problem which have only made things worse because we have never understood the problem. So if one has to go back to the problem again, we are a failed state. How many of us out there know why we are a failed state versus those who think they know? My answer to that one would be the latter are in the overwhelming majority. They think they know when in reality they don't know. And that is very, very dangerous.
Earlier, I was telling you that I'm in a group where they are so-called the wise, the educated, the honorable members, the doctors, and so forth. We were talking about participating in the rigged elections and our continuous participating in rigged elections. And I asked the question to say, do we agree with the observer mission reports that came out of the 2023 election? And overwhelming majority agreed with me to say the elections were flawed and illegal, and the observers were right. And then I followed up with a question to say, what about the recommendations that they gave us? Because we had multiple missions that came through. And within those multiple missions, you find there were similarities in what they wrote. So definitely they saw the problem together. although they were working, separate groups, there were common problems that they identified. What have we done to address those problems? And the answer is, one answer that I got actually, that is worth mentioning was, leave the observer missions alone. You know, Zokwana papi. Look, this is somebody that came to invigilate, to mark your paper, and they mark the paper, and then they give you the corrections. Fix A, B, C, D, then you're on the right path. But then you are closing that paper and say, no, 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 what I got is okay. Leave it as it is. We will just keep on soldiering. I think this is the answer to say, do we know how to fix the problem? We've been told how to fix the problem, how to fix our failure, but we close the book and we walk away, only to come back the very next time, redo the exercise, and still fail the same thing. This is why you find Zimbabwe is a failed state. But in our failure, we are doing the same thing over and over again because we have closed that book and refused to do the corrections. We can never fix anything if we keep ignoring what is happening, what has happened within the history of our country. This is why you find our failure is getting to greater heights. We are sinking and sinking deeper in failure because we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Since 1980, ZANU-PF has been bribing people. Because once you start bribing people to keep quiet, you have to continue bribing them. And now this is why there is a frenzy for cars. Cars here, cars for this league, cars for that league, cars for the Windies, cars for everybody. But that is not the solution. That will not get us out of our failed state. In fact, there's no value addition. We are not producing anything from that. We are sinking worse and worse into failure. I really don't think we do know what needs to be done to get out of failure until we revisit that marked paper and see those corrections and implement the corrections.
I could not agree with you more. Again, it comes back to what we said earlier on, that Zimbabwe is a failed state. While many can see some of the obvious consequences of the failed state, they don't understand why we are a failed state. You touched on the economy there. Understanding that prosperity does not come from spending money or printing money is paramount. Real economic development and prosperity comes from creating the wealth. And if you are going to spend, and you seriously think you are going to spend yourself into prosperity, you're kidding yourself. And yet, that is exactly what is happening, and you're right. ZANU-PF, ever since the country's independence, with Mugabe's scientific socialism, the regime has always believed that the country can be prosperous by spending. Voodoo economics. The whole point of the structural adjustment programs of the 1990s was geared at telling the nation's leaders that you cannot spend yourself into prosperity. They came up with this idea that we should have free education for everybody, free health care, etc. Zimbabwe, at independence, was an upper middle income nation. In other words, we had not reached the GDP per capita of the developed countries. I said at the beginning that our GDP was about 6,000 US dollars per capita. The developed countries, their GDP was 100 times that. And they can afford to have free education, free health care. And even then, it's not really free because they are generating the wealth that sustains it. You cannot come up and try to compete with free health care, free education, when you're an upper middle income nation. So we have a situation here where some people who thought they knew, but in reality they did not know, forcing down the throat of the nation the same failed voodoo economics for the last 45 years. ZANU-PF's mentality has not changed. When Emerson Mnangagwa took over from Mugabe following the 2017 military coup, he announced to the world his so-called Zimbabwe is open for business. He was so cocksure that he was going to deliver economic prosperity to the nation. But when people looked at it and said, what is it he has changed? And you find he actually has not changed anything. Zimbabwe is still a pariah state. So when you say it's open for business, it was closed because it was a pariah state. All you have changed here is a few individuals at the top. It's still a pariah state. And you think that is sufficient to entice the investors to flood into the country. That did not happen. Investors are a shrewd lot. They could see that this was a musical chairs. Nothing had changed. And it took Mnangagwa at least a year before the penny finally dropped, that the investors that he thought would be flooding into the country were not coming. His so-called Zimbabwe is open for business was dead in the water. He accepted that reality and changed it. It was now Zimbabwe Novakwa Nevayo. We are not looking for outside investors, we're looking at ourselves. Again, going to the same problem. He had not understood why investors had failed to come in, and is coming up with another solution to a problem that he didn't understand. And this time, his argument was Zimbabweans themselves would develop the country. It's now 8 years since he took over. The economy has not improved. The Zimbabweans that he expected to step in did not. The economic meltdown of 2000 to 2008 had devastated the economy. Many of Zimbabwe's own industries had closed. Where were the investors coming from? And even the few investing Zimbabweans who had the money, they still need a functional political system that delivers in other areas. The infrastructure should be there. You cannot, for instance, have real economic growth when there is no power. Zimbabwe has suffered the failure to invest in the power industry of the ZANU-PF regime. Some of us who were involved in the power industry would tell you that in 1980, when the country gained its independence, the Ian Smith outgoing government gave Mugabe feasibility studies for expanding Hwange power station by 2 additional units, unit number 7 and 8, and also for building Batoka Gorge. To many ordinary people there, that would be the equivalent of another Kariba Dam between the existing Kariba Dam and Victoria Falls. So that the power generated from Kariba would have been doubled. Ian Smith would have finished those projects if it had not been for the Civil War, the War of Independence. And right now, 45 years after independence, the ZANU-PF regime has only installed the 2 units at Hwange Power Station, 7 and 8. And that has not been anywhere near enough to meet the country's power needs. Because the other 6 units at Hwange Power Station have not been functioning because of poor maintenance. And Batoka Gorge, you can forget it. The lack of power supply to the country has held back the country. And yet, our friend still thinks that Zimbabwe, who are those Zimbabweans? The last 45 years, Zimbabwe has exported teachers, engineers, doctors, nurses. Many, many professionals have left the country just to survive. So where is the manpower that is going to build Zimbabwe brick by brick? He doesn't understand that. And so we come back to the argument we said at the beginning, that one of Zimbabwe's biggest problems is that we have got people who do not even know what the problem is. They pretend to know. And that is really, really dangerous. We are stuck because we've got individuals who are forcing the nation to repeat the same idiotic, failed policies over and over again. And that is our problem.
I believe Zimbabwe is a very, very lucky country and state where you find we have had international, observers come and observe our elections and how we are conducting them. And in that, they have given us reports and they've given us the answers to our problem. And if I may go back to, the GDP per capita, screenshot that was there, you would find that the countries that are doing well, they have certain aspects in common. There's certain things that they're doing together that make them what they are today. The countries that are in the green, those are healthy, functioning, democratic countries. They have been able to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Those that say democracy only exists in the West are lying and they're trying to find a pathetic excuse. We have witnessed Botswana conduct their elections. We have witnessed South Africa conduct their elections. And I mean, the command center, how they did their things was almost flawless. I can't say it was perfect, but it was almost flawless. Everybody, whether opposition, whether ruling party, they were in there with their, gadgets, tallying and adding and doing all sorts of, functional things, functional activities. And at the end of the day, everybody walked out satisfied with the outcome. The opposite is true to Zimbabwe. I mean, look, we could not even get ballot papers in time. A verified voters roll. Your name is not in the voters roll, but your late great grandfather's name is in that voters roll. And yet this is supposed to have been updated in the 2000s. People that have died hundreds of years ago or half a decade ago, what the question is, why can't we see that there is something wrong? And yet we have been told. That's the easy part. The easy part is we have been told. It's not like we have to come up with solutions and we have to come up with what the problems are by ourselves. It's been given. Yet 25 years in, we are still plundering from pillar to post. We really don't know what. I really, it's difficult to explain, especially when somebody has been given the answers. Even if it is a school teacher, I think you get to a point where you become frustrated with the student to say, look, we've been through this. we have explained this. Where is the problem? And I think, it comes to address the other, point that we reached when we were discussing in the group that I had mentioned earlier, that, they're saying that the international community is now worried about Gaza and other states than Zimbabwe. And I said, of course, they have to leave us to our own peril, because we've been told, ladies and gentlemen, the problem is that you are failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections. This is why you are a failed state. And to add on to that, there's a quote from Kwame Nkrumah. He says, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all these other things, the economic, social, and everything, will fall into place. We have the answers. The answers have been given to us. All we need to do is implement. Surely we cannot expect the outsiders to also come and implement democratic reforms that are needed for us to have a government by the people and for the people, a government that is accountable to us. What role are we going to be playing at the end of the day? What is our part? Just sitting there? Of course, the world does not work like that. You have to make an effort to get out. The international community has given you the corrections. It is now up to you to write down the corrections and fix your problem. Lo and behold, we have failed even that. And then the question is, why are we a failed state? Because of us. We have failed ourselves. We have failed to do our own corrections after being given the answers. We're in trouble, Wilbert. We're in trouble.
Well, on the political front, we can talk of ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF, when we're fighting for the nation's independence, one of the issues that they said they were fighting for was one man, one vote. These are some of the key pillars of a healthy and functioning democratic system of government. And yet, before we even attained it, ZANU-PF had changed its mind. In 1980, at the Lancaster House, 1979, at the Lancaster House talks, it was agreed that both ZAPU and ZANU would withdraw its freedom fighters from the field during the campaign period for the coming elections. They agreed to that. They went back to Zimbabwe and they changed. They decided that some of their operatives would remain in the field, and their campaign message to the people was that if ZANU-PF does not win the election, the bush war would continue. Many people don't understand the full import of that. The truth is, the people did vote to end the bush war. Many people thought giving ZANU-PF power would stop the bush war. The bush war, yes, did stop, but the killing did not. Because 3 years after ZANU-PF was in power, we had the infamous Gukurahundi. The primary purpose of Kukurahundi was to force PF ZAPU to give up its claim as an independent political party, because they were the one party that posed a serious challenge to ZANU-PF's continued rule. In 1987, PF ZAPU finally relented and signed the Unity Accord. And that paved the way for the imposition of the de facto one-party state. Again, it comes back to the argument that we were saying before. We had individuals who did not understand what democracy was, and they were imposing a solution that only made the situation worse. The country's problem of democratic rule was not solved by imposing a de facto one-party state. It made it worse. And ever since, the country has been stuck with the one-party state. But it is important at this point that one should also admit that there was an opportunity to end the ZANU-PF one-party state. By the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe realized that ZANU-PF, as long as the regime is able to rig the elections, they will never be able to remove the regime from office. And the solution was, let's elect opposition leaders whose number one task would be to implement the democratic reforms to end the de facto one-party state. People elected Mogel Trangirai and his MDC friends. They promised to deliver the democratic changes. But now, with hindsight, one has got to admit again that they thought they knew, but actually did not know. Because in the 25 years of MDC Triple C, they failed to implement even one token reform. When they had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU, they failed to implement even one token reform. Indeed, since the GNU debacle, the MDC leaders have conned the people to participate in those flawed elections, promising them that change was coming, and yet knowing fully well that they were lying.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifo iri. Plan ya Mwari haifo iri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
The theme I was talking about earlier on, of the danger of those who think they know when in reality they don't know. It's important to mention that we have got millions of Zimbabweans out there who think they know the solution to Zimbabwe's political problems, and they've supported the MDC blindly for decades. What I can say is they are part of the dangerous masses who think they know when in reality they don't know. Because it is these individuals who are keeping on voting for the opposition that has sold out, that has failed to implement the reforms even when they had the opportunity to do so, that has been telling them, calling them to participate in flawed elections to perpetuate the dictatorship. That is one of the most dangerous things you can do. And this is why Zimbabwe is a failed state. We've got too many people in various positions, some in authority, some just the ordinary voters, who think they know the solution, and yet they don't know. They don't even know the problem. They can understand, yes, some of the obvious things why, what a failed state is. But when it comes to why we are a failed state, they have no clue. And this is why for 45 years, we have participated in flawed elections to perpetuate the dictatorship. Thank you very much. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
Zimbabweans can be likened to a person that walks up to the mirror to see their reflection and try and make corrections if corrections are needed. But once it gets to the mirror, they see the blemish and they turn around and they walk away. That is exactly what we have been doing for the past 25 years. Each and every time the observer missions come and give us reports and give us recommendations. At some point, they gave us 23 recommendations, and not even one of them were addressed. We closed that book only to open it again after every election. We are not fixing that problem. We are simply pushing the can down the road. We have become our own worst nightmare. And that is not ignorance to me. It is just arrogance. We think we know. And rightfully, you are right to say we have become a danger, not only to society, but to ourselves. We are a danger to our neighbors, and we can see it. South Africa is complaining about Zimbabweans taking advantage of their system. Botswana is complaining about Zimbabweans taking advantage of their system. We become a burden to others because of our arrogance. It is not ignorance, it is arrogance. Because ignorance is we did not know. But we know because we have held the report. We have spoken about the report. Every opposition member out there ran with the report to say SADC has condemned the elections, and we were very happy. And we did not flip the next page to see the recommendations. Or if we flipped that page, we quickly closed it and ran with the report alone. Up until we address those corrections, Zimbabwe will be a failed state. It is up to us. There is no magic wand. There is no Superman. There is no superhero that is going to come and save Zimbabwe, except Zimbabweans. And I urge each and every one of us to really think our position. Are we going to continue participating in rigged elections after we've been told? And not only told, we also know. that it is futile. We really don't have an excuse anymore. We need to fix our own mess that we have landed ourselves into. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think I'd like to close this and give the last word to Mnangagwa himself. In one of the examples where he claimed to know and turned out that he did not know.
Saka iko zvino magetsi avako, there's no more load shedding. Saka vachiwenga kana munhu akabuya achiti nyama yabora inhema dzake, muti ngave naye nenyama yabora tigomukatsva.
Kasongo yeye Mombali nanga Kasongo mbona wewe Songa libala oh yeye Kasongo mbona wewe Kasongo mbona wewe Mombali nanga Kasongo mbona wewe Songa libala oh yeye
Sometimes the truth cannot be suppressed forever. We need to start understanding the problem, but we also need to understand there are many out there who claim that they know what they don't know. Thank you very much. Have a good night.